Wake up and deliver!
Good morning, John.
Good morning. How's it going today?
Not bad. We're on episode 15 of Wake Up and Deliver. And, on our fancy YouTube channel, you have that fancy Wake Up and Deliver, so I can't mimic that one.
Yeah, the YouTube channel. That's like a whole other thing, man. I see these people that have all kinds of crazy looking, sort of channels when you land on it, and ours is like just so basic at the moment. So it's like, oh, got to get on that when there's time.
We'll move to it when there's time.
Exactly.
As always, we're going to start off with some brain food coffee for the morning, and we get John to dissect if it's good or not. Lately, I've been hit and miss, so I'm not going to say it's a good one, but I think it's a good one. Most geniuses, especially those who lead others, prosper not by deconstructing intricate complexities, but by exploiting unrecognized simplicities.
I am a fan. Look, in all seriousness, we talk so much about the fact that, simple things, value, the core of operations. I would say that I think that the vast majority of people undervalue like the basics and kind of equate simple with either not sophisticated or not innovative when, honestly, was it like Da Vinci or someone the other side of it where it's like, simplicity is the greatest form of mastery or something like that?
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. I think everybody overcomplicates everything, not even specific in logistics, but they always want to fix the most complicated problems. So there's so many simple problems to fix that aren't recognized and that have massive impacts that you should just really focus on, and it will get you far bigger strides than that one, big complex problem.
Well, for sure. And I think the thing is that we inherently believe that, being able to solve things that, to make them look complex or whatever, to have more things going on means that you're smarter, you're more niche, you're more specialized or whatever. So I think people inherently overcomplicate things just because it speaks to their specialization and makes them feel like they have a little bit more of a place.
Like that product expert, he knows what he's talking about, that specific product, and it's complex. It's like those fuel surcharges, right? Are they that complex? And do you like that segue?
Oh, that was so good. That was so good. I love it. Look at you. You're just rolling now. You and like Joe Rogan. You're just like so smooth and like sneaking these things in. Fuel surcharge can definitely be complicated. Actually, so in all fairness, that was a veiled attempt because I told Matt I'd like to talk about fuel surcharge today because I saw a post this morning that was talking about, fuel rates are going down, FSC is going up by some of these companies, like don't let yourself get hosed, essentially, which I think is a very loaded statement because I think, by and large, a lot of people don't understand fuel surcharge or how it's applied or whatever. And I made the comment straight up that fuel surcharge, if it's charged as a percentage of a base invoice, so your core lane or the core activity, generates a profit for everybody. That it does generate a profit because it's not directly always tied to miles or time or the investment or whatever. And
which you said something interesting there. I didn't know that people do a percentage fuel surcharge on the full invoice. It should be only against that line haul activity, not the whole. Like your accessorial should not have a fuel surcharge. And you're saying there's some out there that you've seen that add it to the whole bill?
Well, it depends on how you're doing it, right? I think it's, if you have a lot of like LTL or like parcel activity, right? You don't typically get the same type of accessorial billing as you do in like truckload shipments, right? Like truckload shipments might be like, oh, okay, I have this shipment, that's the base cost for the lane, and then, I've got to use X, so I charge you for that, or I've got to do Y and I charge you for that. I think, and you see this a lot more than I do when it comes to LTL shipments, but I think, when you're talking about multi-stop, multi-drop type stuff, everything starts getting rolled into the drops, like the drop charges. Okay. You know what I mean? So the second that you then end up getting like, hey, I've just did, 5 drops or 10 stops or, whether it's DSD, random LTL that's got a mix of sort of customers and activity, or it's some kind of parcel last mile, like for example, you're not seeing anyone in the parcel world charging an accessorial on certain line items when they might need to use some type of dolly or cart just to bring a package up because it was 55 pounds or something, right? Like they just end up getting the charges to go through, and then everything like lumps under like quote unquote delivery, and then that becomes the base for the fuel surcharge allotment. Like even someone like Canada Post, and this was just because I was looking at some of their stuff recently. You get the charge per parcel that's all, size, weight, and the rate code based on distance and all of this stuff. But that's it. And the fuel surcharge gets applied to everything other than tax, obviously.
Obviously. Well, not always, obviously. So it becomes a profit center is what you're saying, is the fuel, or some people are saying it's a profit center and not to be falling for that fuel surcharge.
Oh, I'm just saying that, like, if Peter's going to attack Paul for the fact that, Peter's rates are higher, but both Peter and Paul are charging on a broad percentage base across the invoice. It's like, listen, guys, you're both making money on it. Let's not pretend you're not. Yeah, maybe Peter's getting a little bit more, but the reality is you're both doing the same. And it came up, I guess, because I saw someone saying like, oh, UPS is hiking fuel surcharge, even though, rates are going down. But even there, it kind of highlights the fact that I think you're preying a little bit on misunderstanding a little bit, or the fact that from the shippers, or that you get a lot of different ways that these things can work, right? Some people use a previous week of activity. Some people use a previous month, right, of activity or whatever. Like fuel surcharge is always this concept of like, what just happened and what percentage do I sort of raise to cover that? It's not future focused. It's not like, guessing on futures or options of what fuel may be and trying to find the right percentage.
It depends on the fuel program. There's some that are weekly, so it's the previous week or whatnot. And sometimes like on some FTLs, it's a rate per mile addition depending on the average cost across the region, or sometimes it's even regionalized. Like if you're only a California runner that you got Robert raising his hand, a California runner that you only pay the fuel surcharge of California, right? Okay, there he goes. So I mean, it depends on the program and how it's created and done. But usually, I've seen like percentages. Usually on the LTL, you're right, it's percentages, and in Canada they do a percentage across it. But I was surprised when you said that. I haven't seen it across the whole invoice. Usually, I see it across.
I agree with you. Like accessorials, like on big truckload shipments or whatever. Obviously, they don't. But I still found it funny because it was like everyone jumping on UPS because it's like they're at like 16.5%. Like, okay, cool. Do you know what LTL percentage is right now? It's 25 to 30%, depending if you look at broad market or someone like XPO or whatever. So, it's really like tongue in cheek in the sense of saying what's going on. And then what I think is also kind of funny is when these comments come up from like gig work networks that don't pay fuel anyway. So that's kind of funny because it's like, oh yeah, you guys are charging additional fees, but then you don't actually pass it on to the last mile people.
That's interesting.
Doing
I never
it.
thought about that. Gig workers don't charge that fuel surcharge. That's interesting.
No, and I mean you did get like Uber and like DoorDash, in all fairness, like when remember like mid COVID or late COVID, I don't know. And like the fuel went skyrocketing, they started doing some kind of additional like fee for it. Like they were charging customers for it. But I mean, it most certainly was still way out of line with the actual market. So I just think that, my advice there to everyone is always take feedback around something like fuel surcharge or rates or anything like that with a grain of salt. Because I always try to get people to think about it like this. If you have your car and you bring it to a mechanic and, mechanic A charges you $100 an hour and mechanic B is $85 an hour, and you're like, well, I'm going to go to mechanic B and I'm going to save like, money on this repair. That's only true if those two people perform at the same level of excellence and quality. Yeah. Right. And that is very often what starts to change when you're talking about differences in base rate or people being very intentional. It's like, yeah, I'll offer $85 and I'll get more people, but I'm going to charge 1.5 times or 1.25 times, or, my quality of service is not as good, and they're going to have more breakdowns anyway. So I think everything becomes really relative. So I always encourage people to be mindful of the rates and consider them, but don't necessarily just jump because of it. Like when I was in my last role and we were managing the fleet, I calculated every labor rate for every external garage that we used across the country. And I did it by ATA code to see the profiles of what was going on. And you could see the same job taking an hour and a half, 2 hours more at one place than another. And when you ask like the branch manager, well, why are you using this guy? Almost always the question was, well, they give us better
cheaper.
rates.
Yeah.
And it's like, they don't give you better rates. They just, they pretend to give you better rates. Robert.
Yeah, and just take the.
Sorry.
Yeah, Robert, welcome up. Welcome up to the panel.
Good morning. Beautiful discussion as always, filled with detailed, relevant facts. And I just raised my hand to give an update on cargo fish. It's it's a decade or two to really changing the world, but it's getting moving. I just dropped off my paperwork at my new accountant to begin payroll.
Nice.
I have 3 employees starting. They've actually been working for free, but finally they're going to start getting paid, and we're going to develop the last mile system that will supersede all others for small format, which is only about half of last mile delivery, admittedly, but half's a good fraction.
Do you have any photos yet or anything like that? Because I know you're talking about some cool things that you were working on.
If I could upload them, I have some on my phone right now. Nothing that has been, no photo that's been snapped since approximately April. I do have, about 190 foot of test track set up in a loop with 1 bifurcation and 1 merge, because essentially that ability to split path or merge back into 1 path, that's what the transistor is to the internet. The transistor enabled the internet. It really couldn't have been done on vacuum tubes. Too energy intensive, too expensive, too fragile, and the
Looks like we lost them.
We might have lost him. I'm gonna, Robert, if you can hear us though after. There's something going on in Philly this week, Matt. Do you know? I don't know. I saw Aaron was. I'm gonna ask Aaron what it is. It's one of the conferences. It's in Philly again, Robert. If you're able to head down and stuff like that. But speaking of transistors, super random. Someone had posted this video of like what an Apple CPU looks like one of their chips. And they just used like an electron microscope to do like some wild zooming. It was insane. Like it was just, it was insane how small and intricate this is. Like it's mind blowing that we have this level of capability these days to design and manufacture this small.
And to ship it by utility soon enough.
There you go. Okay. So last mile, that was the rant on fuel surcharge and stuff like that. But fuel surcharge, talking about profitability, Matt, you had a great point, and we both saw the news about Labor Day and should we call it a bust? Was it a bust? Like,
I think it was a bust. I think everybody was hopeful in August. Prices did creep up. Everybody's like, "Oh, we're turning a corner." And then this is my voice that has hope in it. We're turning a corner. It's going to be great. It's going to be fantastic. And then Labor Day is supposed to be a big weekend for everybody for movement of goods, and it just did nothing. And that's on the heels of companies going under. There's been a few other, not major companies, but it's still significant. Illinois company just recently with 480 drivers stopped. And these are impacts in the marketplace that should increase rates theoretically, but we're just absorbing it consistently. and rates are creeping in some areas, but it's not an overall increase. So I don't know. I'm still skeptical about Q4. I hope it's going to be a lot better than everybody was projecting, but I still think we're going to be in for a little bit of an interesting Q4. I don't think it's going to be as high as everybody thought it would be, or hoping to be rather.
Well, there's like a real challenge that most people aren't really focused in on, right? Like, you know, to your point, people keep being like, I want the good old days back. But the reality is those good old days are gone.
They're gone.
Right?
They're
as
gone.
as retailers continue to broaden out their SKU mix, right? And offer like a larger variety, it inherently means that like they get less density everywhere. Like everyone's going to have their really core stuff, but you know, the more you sell, the more products you sell or make accessible to customers through your site or through your machine or whatever it is, like inherently the longer your tail is going to be in products. Not only that, everyone is trying to sell everything everywhere, which means that you're getting more points of distribution, or you're getting more points of sales opportunities, which again helps drive more sales, but it's inherently increasing your cost, right? Because you know as well as I do, a truckload to one stop and, you know, 26 pallets offloaded to one dock is the best you're ever going to get. You take those same 26 pallets and you have to go to 26 stops, even though you're moving the same amount of stuff, it's going to be way more expensive for you.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
exactly. So, you know, people don't realize that like everyone is selling everywhere. So that rate pressure, that's not going anywhere. And in reality, it's most likely going to continue to get worse and add more pressure to providers to find creative ways to do it, or to find ways to meet that need that, you know, brands or retailers or merchants, vendors, whichever way, you know, whatever classification for whatever industry they're in, have to support. And that's the really dangerous thing.
Well, I find it also interesting that a lot of the new ideas, which is a recycling of old ideas, and we've touched upon it many times before, is a lot of these retailers are coming up with their own private fleets now, right? And they're going to be like, oh, okay, this activity, we're going to help reduce it. But in reality, the cost is the cost. You're still paying the driver. And again, Walmart's one of the best paying trucking companies in the U.S. So they're not paying their drivers less than other companies. So you aren't driving the cost down. You're just hiding the cost and putting it under a different ledger. What I find interesting, though, I hear an argument. Anyways, what I find interesting, though, is a lot when we become a private fleet, they start pushing their weight around for the same efficiencies that these DCs wanted, where, hey, you have to be there by appointment, you have to do this, you have to do that in order to deliver as a 3PL. They're going to other locations and just showing up as a first come, first serve, even though the location demands an appointment by everybody else, and saying, hey, you know, quote unquote, I'm X retailer, I'm here, I need to pick up. And then the warehouse is a 3PL. They're going, no, you need an appointment. They go, we don't care. We're the retailer. Give us our freight now. And I've heard this a few times from a few different people, that this is becoming a bit of a challenge when it's an unfair playing field when it comes to hiding that cost, because they're driving the efficiencies for themselves, but they're not demanding the same leveling playing field from the 3PLs that they're using.
Well, yeah, and I mean that started at their own facilities, right? Like you deliver to like a Walmart DC, or you deliver to like you know,
Big
grocer,
Blue,
whoever it is. I shouldn't be naming names, but you deliver it. You deliver to any of these sort of retailer or industry owned or like whatever facilities. They have been giving themselves advantages for years, and they've started their own programs where it's like, oh, if you use our preferred carriers, or if you use this, or if you use that, you know, you don't have wait times, or you don't have this, you don't have that. But they've been doing that for themselves for a long time. So now they're just pushing it back the other way, because especially in a soft market, or where everyone is like terrified to lose an account, it's like, are you going to go argue with that retailer that's maybe 30, 40, 50% of your gross revenue? You're going to be like, no, go make an appointment. I'm not servicing you, because you know that phone is going to be ringing like the bat phone, calling in an emergency, and someone's going to call that warehouse and be like, you take them right now.
But I think there's people pushing back on it. The feedback I've heard for some of these 3PLs is that they are pushing back on it. They're like, we don't want to do business with you if you're going to be treating us this way. So you can take your products elsewhere. And then the problem is a lot of these retailers do need them, and there's this kind of push and pull situation where who has more leverage as they're trying to figure out these inefficiencies and help reduce those costs on the line haul. And I think, to your earlier point, they're focusing on the wrong aspect of the mile. The middle mile has already been kind of grinded to a level of rates can't really come down too much more on some of these. It's more of that last mile efficiency, or maybe that, not even that first mile, that last mile efficiencies that you just mentioned, like delivering to 16 different stores of one skid. Is there an opportunity for consolidation? But then you're going back to the same point of, then you're bringing it back to a DC. You're not doing direct to store. Like at what point are we chasing the same buck, I think is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, depending on your industry, it gets super tough, right? Like, the other big challenge is the fact that, every square foot matters, and if you can dedicate more of your square footage to potential sales, you're probably going to do better, which means that everyone is limiting backroom space, right? So I have less backroom space, so I'm going to need either more deliveries, or I can't hold as much product at any one given time, or whatever. And then the other thing is, too, with so much segmentation and opportunity to buy it in different places in the market, even if you have a really great store, you have two stores, it's your same banner, it's your same merchant, it's your same marketing, everything. They're going to sell differently, right? Just because of the population that is around that store, or, the layout of that particular mall, or, that the overall geography in the city and the accessibility of the infrastructure, blah, blah, blah. Whatever it is, they're going to sell differently. So then you end up having these different rates of sales. So it's like 2 or 3 pallets to one store makes sense, but those same 2 or 3 pallets for another would, either exceed their capacity or be held too long at the store. You know what I mean? It may not be the right place to sell. So I think that that's the challenge in the market, is that you're getting all of this complexity. And it's funny because this week I told you, right, that article I wrote in my newsletter about 3PLs got so much attention. It's probably the most attention I've gotten specifically for the newsletter for any one thing. And it was because I just wrote in there, I'm like, this is BS. A lot of this advice that people are giving is because it's ultimately highly self-serving, and it's not really the best strategy necessarily for retailers or brands. Or at minimum, it's not the right strategy to say that it's broadly applicable. And I think it has a lot to do with all of these different dynamics and people wanting to sell the easy button, but that's just not the world these days.
It isn't the world now these days. There's too many different factors that go into a lot. Maybe it isn't because there's so much visibility out there as well, right? And the visibility also creates an idea of that I can do more with more of this data or this information, and I think I can make it far more efficient and draw further into a better position.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't know. Like, I agree. It's interesting. I mean, I think people are trying their best to try to orient things, but, and align them. And, I'm not saying people are lying, but I think that it's really important for everyone to take things with a grain of salt and appreciate the fact that everyone's got their own frame and their own context. And I think that that's important to remember.
Yeah. For sure. So, John, what's the number one thing that you're looking forward to this week? What's on John's agenda that we should all be looking out for?
Oh, I don't. No, I don't have a big agenda. I'm trying to actually get some data work and things like that completed. I was playing around with some stuff last night. I've got a few other things to start off the week. I've been working on a bit of a pet project that I got to get into with one of the major WMS software things providers out there. I've kind of trying to build out a different dashboard, more for my own position and curiosity, because I've said that a lot of this WMS software, kind of like a lot of the TMS software, you and I have talked about this, does a really great job of understanding the activity of the logistics, right? So, the move, the different elements of the move, if you're in the warehouse, like the different components of all the warehouse activity. But it doesn't actually do a good job of taking that data and rolling it up into a bit more of a strategic and business oriented sense so that you could actually have, better quarterly business reviews or be stickier for your customers and really speak to them at a more strategic business level. Like everything is more about managing the activity. So I've been playing with that a little bit. I got to see if I can make some more time for it.
Well, I have a question for you, actually, from a shipper, quote unquote, customer perspective.
Yeah.
How vital or important was it to have your providers, your vendors, to give you like a report from their perspective of how well the business is doing?
I think more than anything else, what it helped was understanding what type of, I know this is going to sound really bad and judgy, but what level of quality or what type of carrier they were at, right? I think if you're looking, here's the thing, is that everybody that has a big book of business is going to be looking for proactive opportunities, right? Like as a service provider, whether you like it or not, there's some way looking to either reduce costs, get more out of the activity, get more benefits. So if I had a partner that was very proactive and very knowledgeable and, would actually spend time looking at my data, making suggestions or whatever, that was always impressive in the sense of saying, hey, if this person's willing to take maybe a short-term loss or, appreciate the fact that there's a better opportunity to be more efficient in the short term, it made me wildly more confident to give them more business in the future. Because if I had to always manage everybody and if I thought that this person was always just doing some lazy cost plus and making a great margin and I had to do all of the work all the time, I would say that their value became very relative to then the price and consistency. So it's like you have to then be really like sort of consistent and good on your activity. So I think that there's a lot of value there. I don't think enough warehouse providers, I don't think enough transportation providers lean in enough to data and insights. And the type of data and insights that they do lean into is like the really basic stuff like overall spend and like number of loads. It's like, guys, like that's transactional data that like any system can come out with in like 2 seconds. That's not deep business data. You know what I mean?
What is deep data, business data then? Like in your mind, if you have one of your previous employers, you're a food manufacturer, you're doing delivery, but you have a big RFQ out. You have a whole bunch of new vendors on your RFQ. You provided only volumes, you provided only locations, you provided the basic information that you usually do on RFQ. What does someone have to do with a deep data dive to completely understand and show that they understand your position?
Our RFPs, RFQs, that would be tough because honestly, most of the time, they're run, especially for bigger organizations, they're run by procurement teams and whatever, and they don't allow for a lot of flexibility. If you do have that opportunity, I think that there's tons of things that you can start to do about, if it's intermodal, well, how do you manage rail? How do you manage, for example, the opportunity of like providing a backup over the road option, for example, like, can you manage that? Can you do the triggers? What happens if the load goes over capacity? Like what kind of impact are these types of things? Those are kind of options. When I'm talking about data insights, though, it's usually more when you have your customers, because I think that the most important thing that people should do these days is try to become stickier with who they already have, because you don't want to be rate shopped and you don't want to be RFP'd or RFQ'd. You know what I mean? Because like a lot of big organizations just do those as a tactic to lower rates, right? Which just gets into this cycle of like everybody trying to find, something lower, to get to the bottom. But I can most certainly tell you that RFQ or not, when it came down to getting those submissions and everybody was in the room and we were sitting around the table about making those selections, 100% you started getting those discussions about, no, this carrier is good this way, they do this, I don't want to give this up, like they might be a little bit more expensive, but a failure on 1, 2, 3 extra loads or this other carrier not being as good will cost me more money. So that stuff 100% comes up in the room, but it's you have to be really sticky with the people you've been working with, and you have to have shown them real value. Because I can tell you myself, I've sat in the room and I've said that. I've been like, no, yeah, I could go to a cheaper carrier, but I'm going to lose X, Y, and Z, or I don't have the level of confidence on these types of things happening, and definitely not to this type of degree. And despite what anyone says, it was always, always considered and well received. And honestly, very often swayed decisions.
Interesting. It's interesting. On that note, we're at the time.
We
John,
are
and
at time.
as
That was
always, I'll
fast
give you-
today.
I'll give you the last final thoughts.
No, not
and
today.
my-
You have to take the final thoughts. I spoke too much today. I'm tired.
You spoke too much today. The final thoughts. Geez, it's going to be an interesting week. I think Q4 is going to be a nice, interesting time to try something different that you haven't tried in the past. So to John's point that he was just talking about now, really do a deep dive on your analytics and how you can provide value outside of the transactional piece. I think everybody usually defaults to what's familiar and comfortable and offers the most transactional position they have, but be a little bit uncomfortable and provide something different, even though you might kind of expose yourself in a way, not a negative way, but kind of feel vulnerable. The receiving end, someone like sitting on John's end of the table, might see that as, hey, these guys are at least thinking outside the box. Let's really have a conversation with them to see if they can provide value to us outside of just these rates. And that goes for a lot of different things that you do. So that'd be my final thoughts.
Okay,
on
so
your
all right,
comments.
so now you actually now you inspired now you inspired me on this, because you're right about the uncomfortable thing. Because one thing I used to always share with my teams was talking about this concept of using like evolution as a frame. And it's like, listen, change and being uncomfortable and having that friction in the market is what gets people to sort of adapt. And the ones that can adapt and the ones that can do things differently or leverage any advantage they can, they're the ones who survive. The animals or whatever, the species that essentially can't adapt or whatever, they're the ones that die out. And right now, there is a lot of change going on in the market, and there is a lot of opportunity for people looking, for you to do more than just what you've always done. So I think that it is really important for people to try different things and be looking to change, because it really is the only way that you're going to be able to come out of any period of disruption successfully.
I agree. And on that note, thank you so much for everybody for joining. As always, we'll be back next week and for Wake Up and Deliver.
Bye, everyone. Have a good week.